Stella Rising. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great, Polina. Thank you so much for the introduction.
Well, then let's start.
All right, we'll dive right in. So as Polina mentioned, my name is John Morabito. I'm the VP of SEO at Stella Rising. And at Stella Rising, we work with some really fantastic brands, get to do some really exciting work. That work and talking to many brands has led me to seeing a few things as it relates to website errors and issues and opportunities. So we're going to go through all of that. A little bit more in the background who I am. I write for Search Engine Land magazine. I have done webinars like this for publications and other entities like SEMrush, et cetera. But today, I'm here to talk about how Serpstat can help you out, as well as how, basically we see errors with the website. So moving forward, SEO can be really complex, but sometimes it's really not. And what we see is that with all sorts of exciting trends and all sorts of things happening, oftentimes people miss out on the basics, and the basics are really what's important. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Serpstat's great, because not only can it help you with content generation and all sorts of stuff like that, but of course, the site monitoring and the keyword research are really going to be some of the crux of what we're going to talk about today. Through a focus on the basics and really core SEO principles, ensuring that we don't have any errors, ensuring that we have well-optimized pages, and really ensuring that we're targeting the right keywords, we've been able to get some pretty fantastic results for our clients. So we're going to walk through some of those things that we see in those audits. Again, basically where this comes from is as part of all of our conversations with clients, we do an initial evaluation of that website. And within that initial evaluation, I am seeing what tend to be some common mistakes and some common things that we'd like to highlight today that would hopefully be able to help you avoid. And by the way, if you'd like for us to do an audit of your site, please feel free to reach out. I've got my email listed on the screen there, and we can do kind of a similar audit and show you where we're seeing these types of opportunities. All right, so lacking page level optimizations. 89% of sites that we audited have the opportunity to optimize and improve title tags. And by the way, I want to really emphasize one thing about this. These percentages, I actually had people on my team go through all of the audits that we've done over the last couple of years. And so these figures about the percentages and the number of audits, we actually went through the folder and then had like a giant matrix of which sites actually suffered these issues. So as true to life as we can get these metrics, they were. So we found 89% of sites that we audited had the opportunity to improve title text. What that means is within the audit that we did, we were highlighting basic opportunities to just include the keyword in the title tag. What is this page? In this example, we're looking at a page of CBD and hemp. CBD hemp what? It doesn't say what it is. We obviously need to expand on the fact that it is skincare and beauty products. And so this type of foundational stuff, we found on 89% of the websites that came to us, many of them had SEO partners, internal teams. It's not like they weren't doing SEO in some shape or form, but they just weren't focused on this foundational stuff, which good keyword research and good keyword tracking can help you to really sort of action against and then make sure you're monitoring. Duplicated meta descriptions, missing meta descriptions. 95% of sites that we audited had some sort of major issue in this regard. And again, Serpstat's ongoing monitoring tools would be a good opportunity, a good way for you to catch some of this stuff in the crawl tools to make sure that you're identifying these types of issues. So header tags are another big issue that we came across a lot. 95% of sites we audited were basically misusing header tags. Oftentimes, H2s were being put in place of things that really should be other semantic headings. A sort of common example of this that we see would be where people are using an H2 on something like their newsletter or some type of call to action that's in the footer, maybe even a header of a footer column that would appear in an H2. And usually what ends up happening here is the developers reaching for that semantic heading because they feel like that's the easiest thing to get the look and feel that they're looking for. But really, it doesn't say anything unique about the page. So we like to try to address those. Another thing we see Lacking content strategy. 60% of sites that we audited either have no content strategy or one that is very nascent. What I mean by that is maybe they get a few blogs, maybe there are a few things that they're doing, but they're not really having a cohesive strategy behind it. So there's not really any thoughtful top of funnel content. Maybe the content is poorly written, poorly optimized. So this was something that we saw again in about 60% of sites. I'm seeing some questions pop into the chat. I will definitely take some questions later on and try to answer what I can along the way. All right. So EEAT, EAT as it's labeled here on the slide, is something that we found really, obviously, it's important for every website in some way, shape, or form, but for different reasons, it might be more or less important for your website. So in the case of publishers, is really where we honed in and looking at 40% of sites that we audited in relationship to their publishing have an opportunity to better demonstrate EEAT. So we came across content that wasn't written by experts. We came across sites that maybe did have expert content. Like one of my favorite examples is we're working with a large enterprise client that actually has dermatologists writing the content. And then there's like a clinical director that's reading and signing off on the content that the other dermatologists are writing about, and that wasn't even present on the website. So Google had really no shot at understanding, outside of being able to analyze the content itself, which really was expert written, whether or not this was written by someone who knows what they're talking about. This is, speaking about current events, this is kind of interesting stuff with what's going on with notes and how they're starting to pull in social profiles for certain authors or publishers or people who are putting out notes and engaging with content. And so we know that Google can identify who an author is. But there's definitely, some opportunity to include this on many places. All right, so don't block policy info. This one's kind of going back to that EAT sort of concept. So in the Search Quality Raters guidelines, we see that there is a mention of ensuring that you can get to who's responsible about the website, that if a website, the primary page includes financial transactions, then it should have satisfying customer service information. So one of the things that I noticed for a lot of Shopify websites is that if by default your privacy policy, your other policy pages are in the policies directory, they'll be by default blocked by robots.txt. So not necessarily like you need to have your terms and conditions crawlable, although I would argue like why not let Google crawl them? But definitely we've seen people who have their shipping and returns policy underneath this policies directory, which by default is blocked in Shopify. But recently they gave us the ability to control robots.txt. And so that's something that we would want to back out of. Basically back out of being blocked. Don't ignore image optimization. This is something that I think is becoming even more and more important the more that Google is kind of being forced to prioritize other formats within SERPs, inclusive of images. So 82% of sites we audited have images that were missing image alt text, that were above the recommended sort of max 100 KB. And that obviously can weigh down the page and impact page speed, impact user satisfaction on the page if it takes too long to load and that type of stuff. Poorly optimized category pages. Excuse me. All right. So we do a lot of e-commerce work. And one of the things that we found was that there's a bit of a recipe, in our opinion, for a really successful e-commerce category page. And when we look at the traffic for many of our clients, most of the traffic really groups up around these category pages. So we found that 53% of the sites that we audited really can better optimize their category pages in a sort of meaningful way. And of course, we don't only do e-commerce site audits. So this is a pretty high number considering that many of the sites we audit are also sort of focused on lead generation and other initiatives. Poorly optimized title tagging meta descriptions. We talked about that earlier. It's an obvious area of opportunity. If you have an e-commerce website, look at all of your category pages. Do they really say not just what is the product, but do they drill down into keywords that you are likely to rank for? So let's say that you sell men's socks. Okay, sure, your men's socks category page sells men's socks. What type of men's socks are they? Are they for golf? Are they compression socks? Are they really like funky colored socks that are reminiscent of 90s sort of style? You really need to drill down into what it is very specifically in order to make sure that you're driving traffic the best you can to those pages, while of course balancing search volume, etc. So that's one of the key things and opportunities. But then cross linking, doing making sure that you have obviously there's a lot of talk about category copy, whether it does work, whether it doesn't work. Google's made statements. We do kind of in our own testing feel as though for many of our client sites it's beneficial. Often it's usually placed in the bottom of category pages, and should really answer questions and really help provide additional information. And that's why we say user-centric copy. It shouldn't just be there to put a bunch of keywords on the page, but adding that copy is definitely an opportunity that we see across a lot of category pages. FAQ content is another big one. So, if your products are not super obvious and why you want to buy them and how they work, then you have a really tremendous opportunity to educate and answer questions on the category page itself as opposed to in the product page. You may never get them to the product page. They might not actually ever navigate to the product page. And so if they're scrolling down a category of products and saying, I don't know what fits my needs, and they reach the bottom of that category page and there's an FAQ that helps to sort of shepherd them into the proper purchase decision, then I think, there's some obvious opportunities to win there. So this one's kind of funny. Call them like you see them. Many times we see areas where people have stuff on their site that is of a particular nature. In this particular example, it's recipes. But because that section of the website is nothing but that thing, it doesn't really cross anyone's mind, or even crosses people's mind to say that, well, we shouldn't call it that because that word would be everywhere. It would be duplicative. It would be redundant. So in this particular case, it's a recipe site, or it's a section of a site, it's a grocery store that has oodles of recipes on it. And within these recipes, it would just say like shepherd's pie. And it never would say recipe in the H1, the title tag, core basic elements. Now, one would say, well, of course, it's a recipe. There's 2 cups. And shouldn't Google just kind of know, like, does it really make that big of a difference to simply put the word recipe in the title tag and the H1? Well, I would argue yes. In this particular example, we used a tool basically to just test dynamically inserting that title, and the result of that, and then we basically rolled it out with the developers, but basically the result of that was we saw 101% lift in the number of users from organic search visiting that page over the course of the next year. So it wasn't like an immediate change, but basically following that change, we started to see traffic ramping up just from simply adding the word recipe to the page. Site architecture issues, this is another common thing that we see, and this really starts to get more into thinking, it's not just things that we can quickly identify, but really have to take a little bit of time to think about what's happening from a strategic perspective on the site. So site architecture issues often include things like missing category pages to address particular searcher needs. One of the sort of common things I see is sometimes sites that are leveraging something like Shopify's attributes or filtering systems will have the ability for you to navigate into a bunch of very specific categories or collections that are really filterings on a primary collection for which all of these other ones are then canonicalizing back to. So you can navigate to very specific product collections, but those are not actually indexable landing pages. So very often we're coming in and looking at the taxonomy of sites and saying, is this something that we think searchers are actually interested in? Oftentimes we find, primary navigation missing important pages, or faceted search causing big issues is another one. So, we talked a little bit about filters and facets and these types of things, but if those are, technically implemented as like radio boxes and there's 8 hrefs behind those, or other implementations that again involve a true Ahref link, a crawler can then sort of generate almost an infinite combination of variations based on crawling that facet. And so that's something that we often have to look at and make sure that we're mitigating how much that can sort of spin out of control. Click depth issues. So around 40% of the sites we audited found opportunity for them to reduce click depth. And so what do I mean by click depth? Basically, the number of clicks it takes from a crawler or a search engine to get from the home page to a given page in the site. Why is this important? Well, typically your page rank or the equity that you receive kind of pools around your homepage. Usually people end up linking to brands' homepages. And so the idea here is we want to make sure that we're effectively passing that page rank to important pages on the website. The best way to do that is to link directly to them, but we can't link everything from our homepage. So there has to be a balance here. And what we're looking to do is basically elevate pages that are deeper within the site architecture, higher up within the site architecture, by expanding the number of pages you might have on a category page. So instead of showing 16 products, maybe you show 32. By creating more category pages and then nesting those under other category pages, or creating more category pages that you link into the primary navigation. In an e-commerce website and a publisher website, believe it or not, I've seen sites with 50,000, 100,000 pages will get most everything between level 3 and 4. And have a good chunk of it be at level 1 and 2 as well. The bigger your site, the more equity you have, the more you can kind of nudge up toward the front. Another thing that we see is expanding, basically showing more pagination. And I'll talk about that in a second here. Okay, so flattening your pagination tunnels. So a lot of sites, this is a really cool trick for really, really, really big sites where you want to rapidly sort of like compress the, not compress, but you want to bring up a lot of pages into higher levels. Sorry, I'm trying to like do a time check in my head and also think about how many slides and how long I want to talk about this because it's exciting stuff. So if you were to, let's say, have a website where you've just got 50 pages of blogs, and on the blog archive, you've got one blog page, one archive page, and there's a load more button, and you've got 10 blogs per page. What did I say? There's 50 blogs and there's 10 blogs per page. So your oldest blog is automatically going to be at level 5. Now, if you were to then go to a sort of stepped pagination where you're actually showing other pages. So in this example, we're showing page 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're showing previous and next. So there could be any number of pages on either side of that, but we're showing a number of pages. In the example of the 50 post blog, we would basically have everything at level 2. Because once you go into that first page, everything would be at level 3. We go into that first page, then they would crawl the other paginated sort of pagination and go into, they really crawl the pagination. They would crawl the next page in the set. And then they would go into that page and extract all the links off of that page. And you're effectively bringing what would have been 5 levels deep into the second level. And so this idea of just simply having more category pages wherein you're showing those like sort of old school pagination numbers at the bottom can actually have a really material impact on improving things. Another thing I see happen here sometimes is pagination gone wrong. Pagination gone wild, if you will. So around 33% of all websites we audited have pagination issues. A lot of times these are e-commerce websites. The most common thing and probably the worst thing I see is infinite scroll not being implemented properly with missing A tags. So essentially, these are pages where Google can't even get to the next page. They can't see the other products in that collection. They're entirely relying on XML or sort of happen chance for that product to be merchandised at the first page of a collection for them to even get that page in the crawl. Paginated URLs with no index tags. Oh my God, we're telling Google don't index this page. What do you think they're going to do from a crawl perspective? They're not going to come back and crawl that if we're telling them to not index it. Paginated URLs with canonical tags pointing back to page 1. Again, these are all symbols that kind of tell Google like, hey, don't pay attention here. Thus, if you have important content on those pages, not a good sort of signal we want to be giving, right? We want to be telling them, hey, come check this stuff out. It's good stuff. And then offering only links to the next page and sort of just like these very deep pagination tunnels, which we kind of touched on before. We're going to kind of go into this a little bit more here, right? So paginated URLs with no index tags. Googlebot may slow or stop crawling of pages with no index tags. I mean, think about it. Why would they? If they come back to a page and they're consistently seeing, no, don't index me, don't index me, don't index me. Even if they're picking up new content off of that page, they're kind of being dissuaded from finding a lot of value in that page. And so that's where we'll at least see them sort of slow down. Now, if you have, let's say, a big e-commerce website and pages beneath page one are saying, no, don't come crawl me, don't come index me, but you've got product that's kind of coming onto the website at all times, this can be a big problem. And a lot of times what we'll hear people say is like, well, no, we don't want page 2 index, we want just page 1, or isn't this duplicative content because all of these pages have the same title tag? And it's really not true, because Google is very good at understanding this is a paginated set. In fact, they want to see the depth of your collection. I sort of believe in sort of some hocus pocus. Like, I think the volume of products you have in a collection is something that in some way, shape, or form, in fact, ranking. And I can't explain exactly what I mean by that, but like, obviously, if you were to draw a correlation between the number of category pages in the top search results that have a good assortment of products as opposed to those that have a thin one, not a lot, I think we'd see a pretty good sort of correlation there. So in the same vein, if we're telling Google, hey, don't look at this stuff, don't index this stuff, we're stopping them from seeing the breadth of our collection. So this is one that I see it pretty commonly. So check the way that your pagination works and ensure that you're really inviting Google to crawl all of that stuff so they can get it. So, one of the things that's important about, ensuring, just the pagination should be indexable and have self-referencing canonical tags. And so another thing here in terms of why this is crucial to get right is Google's not likely to render and extract links from content from a paginated page that's set to no index, and kind of already hit this. And so this is just sort of like a little tweet and a little bit of evidence. This guy JC is really great. And so he's asking, will Google render the HTML if we send the no index via the HTTP header? So let's say that all of the stuff on the page that you're wanting Google to extract and find, even if you're saying to yourself, well, I have a no follow, or a no index follow, they don't really care, because as soon as they see the no index, they're probably not going to render the page and extract the HTML. Here's John Mueller saying, like, probably not. In some cases, while they may extract the info for the link graph, this is not the sort of thing you want to leave to chance. So of course, Gary gives a different answer, because these guys are never always giving, exactly the same answer. And that's fine. It's kind of how it goes. But I think, again, what it comes down to is, like, do we want to leave that to chance? No, we should ensure that pagination is cleanly crawlable, that we're not asking Google to go 50 pages in to discover all that stuff. Again, why is it critical to get right? Pages linked off your paginated sets need page rank. So long-term no index, again, going back to that attribute. And by the way, I'm very much harping on pagination and errors in pagination, but I want you all to understand that some of these are principles that you'll see other places in our work, right? Like this idea that, well, I don't want the page to be indexed, but I want the link equity off of it. So this sort of concept is exactly why no index is not a great solution, or often isn't a great solution for faceted search. Because long-term no index will lead to no follow on links. Well, what do you mean by that? So basically, if you have a no index tag on a page long enough, Google's going to drop page rank that passes off of that page, because they drop that page from their sort of link graph. John Mueller explains in a webmaster video that the long-term no index follow commands will eventually equate to a no index no follow directive as well. Basically, Google's going to stop going to the page and remove it from the index, thus so it's not the dropper from the link graph, that they're going to just stop going to it. So they're not seeing it, it's not there, and thus it doesn't have any value for you. So just be careful where you're applying no index follow. By the way, follow is the default state. You don't need to put follow. Google automatically follows, and thus incidentally will automatically decide to no follow eventually when they drop it, because of the presence of the no index. So it's kind of funky, right? But what about the follow attribute? Yeah, I kind of gave away the farm here, right? Or I gave away the joke. Follow is not a supported meta directives, right? Like, we, as in the SEO community, we just kind of made it up. So it's technically not something that needs to be there. But if we see the no index there for longer than we think the page really doesn't want to be, and this is John Mueller, used in a search, we'll just remove it completely. And so again, they're kind of coming back to like, it's interesting how we don't have as much control over that particular directive as we thought we did, but ostensibly saying no index, it's kind of at that point a little bit up to them what happens, whether to your equity and the link equity that might pass through that page. But generally, I wouldn't count on it. All right, so pagination done right. Well, you want it to be indexable, you want it to be crawlable, you want to have self-referencing canonicals, you want to have a substantial number of items per page, and this can not only help to really show value within the page itself, but also help with some of the crawl depth stuff that we talked about earlier. And crawl budget waste. So most websites are not going to have problems with crawl budget. But 22% of websites that we audited do have some type of crawl budget waste that includes excessive amounts of internal linking to 301s, crawl traps, crawlable faceted search, and that's really the most common one. Faceted search that is just spinning out of control because it's crawlable. There's no absolute directives to stop indexing there. So maybe there's canonicals, and that can not only cause a lot of index bloat, where some of that stuff will become indexed, but also will call just a lot of like Google to be crawling a bunch of junk that we don't need. So this is something that you do want to look out for, but it's not something most people need to worry about. I don't have like a number for you, but you can see in the case of the site we're looking at, there's 1 million pages on the site, and a third of them, right? 2/3 of them, no, 25% of them, right, are not indexable. So kind of a waste, right? So it's a needle in a haystack. All right. Oh, this is supposed to animate. Go ahead, Homer. All right. No, I guess he's not going to crawl. But how to save crawl budget? Use robots.txt versus no index where appropriate. So no index will we just talked. I don't want to talk out of two sides of my mouth here, but it will dissuade Google. Eventually, they'll stop crawling it. Like, that is all very like non-absolute. We want to know. And the lever we have on hand to know with certainty is robots.txt. So we want to use robots.txt to control crawling where we need to, but keeping in mind that anything that gets linked to that's blocked by robots.txt also will not have any link equity value for us. So we have to use that sort of carefully. We want to avoid redirects and internal sort of 404s, and just like linking to anything that's not canonicalized, or sorry, avoid linking to canonicalized URLs where you can. This is another thing I see all the time. People like don't link anywhere to the canonical URL in their site architecture, and instead they have parameterized URLs for measuring. I don't know who's measuring it or what they're measuring, but somebody's measuring something where there's parameters on thousands of URLs, and every single time I say, guys, what are these URL sort of parameterizations? And they say, oh, that's for measurement, and we need to know where people are clicking. And I say, okay, cool. Who's looking at that data? And they all look at each other. Somebody told us to set it up, and I swear I've never come across anyone that's like, oh, Jim down the hall, Jim's using it. Every time it's like this thing that's there. And then when we explain to them, hey, if you need to know, like, hey, a user went from this page to this page, like, let me show you the Explorer reports in GA4, or let me show you how we can tag this up in GTM so that we can measure the way that users are navigating through the website without necessitating 4 different versions of the same URL. And then I'm sure there's places that's bothering them in their own measurement too. So that one is like actually surprisingly common, where people have like wild parameterized URLs for no reason. Ask them if you see ref, like ref, right? It's usually refer, right? And it probably doesn't need to be there. Increase your server capacity. Looking at time here, I'm gonna try to go a little faster here, maybe, because I want to make time for questions. I see some cool questions coming in. Combine resource files where you can. So this one's Interesting. So if you're thinking about like a million page website and you've got a single page, I have seen single pages that have 72 resources. Now, when I say a resource, that could be a JavaScript file, could be an image file, could be a CSS file. When we talk about crawl budget, every URL that Google crawls goes against your crawl budget, which, by the way, they don't use that phrasing. It's crawl rate and priority, but nonetheless, I digress. So when we talk about crawl budget, let's say Google is crawling on average for this million page website, 500,000 URLs. If there is, and let's just say for easy math, right? I'm not even going to try to do this math on my head because I'm live on air. But basically, I think you get the idea. If there's 72 resources, one page takes 72 of those 500,000. And so let's say that we're like a real estate website and we just put a bunch of new content on the website and we need Googlebot to see that so that we can quickly get our customers. We want to make sure that we're compressing and reducing the number of those files that don't need to be there or could be compressed into one. So if you've got a bunch of disparate CSS files, not only is this great for page speed and all those other sort of minification and combining things, but really also will help with crawl budget, and just also be thoughtful about the number of resources you're loading on a page. Okay, that's my rant about resource numbers. Okay. This one, I love to talk about JavaScript SEO. I wish I could have been in the room. If there ever was a room where this stuff started changing. How do I deal with a website with a lot of throw-ins? I tell them to fix them. I know that's what we can talk about it more, but basically, even if that means helping to manually update them, giving them, here's the path on where the pages have, and this is where you need to go in and you need to update it. But I try to fix as many of them as we can. But you want to also look at whether or not it's worth your time. Using JavaScript for links. So let's talk about being in the room. I really feel like when sort of JavaScript frameworks made sort of a massive leap forward and a lot of developers became trained on how to build websites via Next.js and, well, really first it was like React and Angular, and then it was more like Next and Gatsby and these other things. And thank God for Gatsby and some of the more later frameworks that do a little bit more rendering to the server side and make things a little bit easier. But essentially, there was this big push to using JavaScript frameworks, but there was almost like kind of not really paying much attention to the way that crawlers worked. And what I mean by that is often these developers would develop ostensibly a web application and be very heavily using JavaScript buttons, which is cool for users. And the pages are snappy and it looks beautiful and it's great, right? The problem is that crawlers are extraordinarily reliant, at least at this point, on true Ahref links. And this is something that I see even really great sites with great UX and UI and fantastic developers just kind of missing. And you have to kind of educate on the fact that Googlebot is stateless. They do not click. They do not crawl. I'm sorry, they do not scroll. So they don't click. They don't scroll. They don't do these things that bring interactions into the document object model. They're really just parsing out what's delivered to them either server side or client side. And they're putting that all together. So if there isn't a link there to another page, they're not going to crawl to that page. So this is something that I see happen in navigations. Do I have a slide about navigation? Yeah, I believe I do. But also in these like learn more buttons very commonly. So if you're checking a site and you see, okay, they've got like, this sort of like infinite scroll kind of deal, or they've got like a load more button, check that load more button and see if it even is an Ahref. And really one of the easiest ways that you can do this is simply by hovering over. If you're on a website and you see what looks like a link to another page and you put your mouse over it and you don't get, at least in Chrome, a little gray link to the next page over here, or if you can't inspect on that element and then see that, hey, there's an Ahref, you may indeed have a button. So in this case, you're seeing two things. That really is a JavaScript button. You can see the developer has labeled it type button, and it's a button. It's not a link. It takes you to a route in the application, but I don't want to go to a route. I want to go to a page. They're the same thing. It's a joke. But basically, we need an Ahref for Googlebot to crawl over to that. Someday they're going to crawl buttons, right? I'm sure of it, but not today. And so the other thing that you can do is obviously inspect there and look, and see whether or not that you're seeing that. Another thing too is blocking critical resources. I see websites, believe it or not, still to this day blocking JavaScript, CSS, and other important directories that are critical to fully rendering the page as the user would see it. So when we look at the page in a browser, it looks fine. When we crawl the page as Googlebot, because we are respecting the robots.txt declarations, we are seeing that the page is busted up. Now, this is something you can test with Google's mobile-friendly testing tool. You don't even need to have Google Search Console access for the website in question. John Mueller has stated on numerous occasions in mobile-friendly testing tool, if your page looks jacked up, professional sort of official industry term, if your page is looking all jacked up, then that is likely what Googlebot sees when they render the DOM. Now, the important thing to note there is, what does jacked up mean? What's missing? Sometimes it's like CSS and it just doesn't look pretty. Okay, well, not great, but what if it's JavaScript? What if that JavaScript renders the products onto the page? And we've seen this happen where a site actually doesn't have, it's an e-commerce website. The category page shell loads, header, footer, but the products don't load because the JavaScript application or the sort of particular file that thing needs is blocked in robots.txt for whatever reason. So this is something, make sure that you want to use, you want to be testing what resources and checking, and this is something that you can just kind of look at what resources are critical to the page and then go check your robots.txt. Canonicalization is something that we see often go wrong as well. Internal linking to canonicalized pages. This is something out of the box Shopify does. Like if you're linking to on a category page, it will link to the within collection sort of string. Not great, especially if you're not linking anywhere directly to the canonical. Google does say directly in their guidelines, you want to be linking directly to that canonical. Not accounting for www variants, and we talked about the parameters earlier, so kind of hitting on some of the things I said earlier. I got jokes, right? Do as they say, not as they do. Canonicals can be tricky. Even Google gets it wrong sometimes. So check this out. John Mueller states, you shouldn't mix no index and rel canonical, as they are very contradictory pieces of information for us. We'll generally pick the rel canonical and use that over the no index, but anytime you rely on interpretation by computer script, you reduce the weight of your input. I will also say, I promise you I can find instances of John Mueller saying that they will often go for the more restrictive directive, or maybe it's Gary. Again, either way, Google has said both things here. And there's another instance of them saying that it's in some cases, and I believe John gives good reason, in some cases you might want to actually use both of these things. Nonetheless, be thoughtful about how you're using canonicals. Canonicals can also get ignored. This is one of my favorite interview questions for people too. But what are some instances in which canonicals might be ignored? Canonicals are really intended to consolidate ranking signals for similar pages. They have to be appreciably similar for Google to really honor the canonical and follow it from a ranking sort of signal passage perspective. So search facets, which is one of the most common places I see people utilizing these utilizing canonicals to sort of like canonicalize back to the URL without any parameter. Not a great usage. Let's say you've got a product category page that starts off with 50 products and then you do 3 facets. That's canonicalized back to the 51, but now this page has 3. And maybe even it's like you've searched for 15-inch pendant necklace and now Googlebot can crawl that. And it's like, wait a minute, this is not the same as the general necklaces page. So I don't know. I'll ignore your canonical. I think I'm going to index this because it seems valuable. And so sometimes these are cool to like pick up on what Google might want to index and utilize for your site. But in general, canonicals can be ignored. Very often it's because the content is not appreciably similar. All right, internal linking. 57% of sites that we audited have some type of internal linking issue. Now, this is again 301s, 404s. We're linking to non-canonical URLs. Stuff like that is very common. I hit on this a little bit before, but Shopify out of the box does this internal linking thing where for most collection most theme developers, so maybe I shouldn't blame Shopify, but most theme developers, including like default themes from Shopify, have within the collection page this string that says product URL bar within current collection. And what it basically states is when you link to the product off of a collection page, you're going to include that /collections, /product, /whatever, right? But that then canonicalizes back to just /products, /product name. So we always go in and we remove that. And really, this is what you're seeing here is the liquid edit that you would want to make in the liquid file. And then we would make that just the product URL. This may impact breadcrumbs. I'm not a developer, but the breadcrumbs are often driven off of that within collection, but there is a way that a good developer can actually sort of tweak that. Structured data, missing structured data, validation errors, 55% of sites we audited have some opportunity to improve this. And it's something that I think is very valuable to spend some time on. Common issue here around aggregate structured data. So this is one that a lot of websites, Shopify, whatever, a lot of websites we partner with that are doing e-commerce are using some type of third-party tool. Yepto, Bazaar Voice. It doesn't matter what the third-party tool is. Almost all of them will output the aggregate structured data, but they don't have all of the detailed information about the product name, the image, etc. So that gets output in another separate block. Now, very often Google is able to say, okay, same page, two pieces of schema, they go together, but these are not explicitly tied together as they appear on the page. And oftentimes you'll see them pop into two different things as you're testing them in like the rich snippets testing tool or something to that effect. You might see that it takes Google a really long time to pick up the rich snippets. They might not pick up the rich snippets at all. So one of the ways that you can ensure that Google understands that this is one cohesive block of structured data inclusive of the product, and this is aggregate rating, and this aggregate rating is for this product, is to basically add the ID, and the ID consists of @ and then the URL, and that basically marries together those two blocks. It's, again, something that you'll want to have a developer do with you. So I'm going to skip on that one. Poorly optimized XML sitemaps. So 64% of sites we audited have XML sitemap issues of some kind. And this includes orphan pages, non-indexable pages, pages missing from the XML not listed in robots.txt. Orphan pages are usually my favorite because we're almost always able to show people something that they're like, oh, I didn't know we had that page live. Core Web Vitals. So at least 80% of sites that we looked into do not have pages that pass Core Web Vitals. It's something that a lot of people really get wrong. And we're really not seeing huge ranking increases from that, but it is something that we see on a lot of sites as being an opportunity. Broken backlinks, 76% of sites we audited have some number of broken backlinks. Around 36% have over 500 broken backlinks. So it's not just a few. A lot of sites we look at have many, many thousands of broken backlinks that are just not being attended to. Hreflangs are really hard. A lot of the work we do with international brands, and a lot of that is doing Hreflang work. A lot of the sites that we see get this wrong. In fact, up to 60% of sites have some issue. And then hreflang tips. When it comes to hreflang, one of the things that I want you to think about is if you're trying to do a really large site, it's best to try to do them with XML sitemaps. And the reason for this is going back to crawl budget and these types of things, crawl priority. For Google to understand the associations between all of these hreflangs, they need to crawl all of the pages. Now, if you're dealing with a very large international website, some of your other market pages might not have a lot of crawl priority, thus they might not get crawled very frequently. And so you're going to wait a long time for them to sort of see these associations. Conversely, if you submit XML sitemaps, they understand those associations immediately, and they're a little bit easier to maintain than actually having to go into the title or to the header of the page and update those. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave that screen up and I'm going to shift gears and try to answer some questions here.
It was great, John. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Do you want to maybe pick some questions or should I, or how do you want to do it?
Yes, sure. A few words from myself. It was great. Thank you very much. I was so excited, not baseful, to be honest. And there were a few questions. They were the same. It's about tools you can suggest for SEO. And I want to take a word from this point. And about Serpstat, of course, because Serpstat is a go-to SEO platform for all needs you can face during such issues that John shared with us today. And to implement this knowledge, you can always rely on us. And for example, to stay informed about any sudden changes in your website data, monitor any issues that arise, receive detailed explanations about them, and optimize your website like a pro. That all we have. And of course, now we have discounts. So it's the best time of the year to get Serpstat and take everything from this live. And I'd like to start from questions I noticed during the webinar. That's it, the first one. Could you share the correct method for checking a website ranking in different sites?
In different cities. Or different sites? Yeah, cities. Okay, yeah. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, totally. So I mean, I think it goes right back to Serpstat. I mean, ultimately, one thing I'll say about tools is that I am a big believer in emerging tool providers. I'm a big believer in community-led tool providers and those that make this technology affordable. And it sounds like, you know, the deal you guys have going on right now is hard to beat. And so I would say in terms of tracking, right, from a methodology perspective, I would say, well, the tool is one, so you need a tool that tracks and allows you to go down into the market specific. I would say even within a particular city, it can change drastically based on zip code. So tracking based on zip code is another sort of opportunity, at least here in the US, or postal code internationally. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I would say it's really all about the setup.
Let's move on to the next one. Do auto-generated XML sitemaps work?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I would say they're preferred. So we try to only generate XML sitemaps for people if it's like the only option. I was talking about this with somebody yesterday, or not, the day before yesterday, and I sort of asked, like, you know, do you think Google wants us to have XML sitemaps, and do you think they need us to have XML sitemaps? And in terms of do they want us to have XML sitemaps, no, right? They rather us not need them. They rather be able to find everything without us needing to tell them where it is. Like, that's their thing. They want to be able to find everything. So XML sitemaps are really but a crutch to that. And so I promise I'm going somewhere with this, which is like, in fact, if the XML sitemap is static and they've already discovered those pages, it's not doing a tremendous amount for you. Really, I would argue that auto-generated XML sitemaps, those that bring your most recently published pages into Google's awareness, are their key function, the number one reason you need them. And I would even argue, if your website's not tremendously difficult to crawl or get through, that they don't really need them. So long as they know where you are, they're determining their crawl priority on your pages on their own. They're not really listening to what you're telling them in the XML sitemap in terms of like priority or anything like that.
Great. The next one. How can you detect and control orphan pages appearing?
Do you want to take that one, Polina? Do you guys have a orphan page identification in the tool? I don't remember. In your tool?
I guess yes. I'm sorry to be so unconfident, but
all right. So here's one way you can do it, right? Regardless of your tool. I'll tell you how I did it before tools enabled us to do this. Would be if you have a total list of all of the pages on your website that you're aware of that are crawlable, I would take that list and then I would export the XML, and then I would also export what we could identify within the index, and then do sort of cross-referencing using VLOOKUPs and just say like what isn't found in this file, etc. But I think I'm not sure technically whether or not Serpstat's crawler identifies orphan pages. Either way, there's a lot of crawlers out there that do have that as a capability.
How long does it typically take to see a result in organic traffic after optimizing a website?
Great question. So it depends on what you're changing. So when it comes to title tags, meta descriptions, if you've updated copy on a page and added a bunch of like refreshed helpful content to a page, we see those changes making an impact anywhere from a few days to a week. So it can be really quick. That impact will then continue to build steam. But in terms of when the initial change will happen, it can be very quick. Now, if we're talking about like we fixed a bunch of 301s, we updated our navigation to include other pages. These are things that are changing more with the link graph and the way that equity passes through the website. And those tend to take many weeks to kind of take form as there's recalculations happening and stuff like that.
Good. I'm not sure if you already answered this question, but here it is. How do you deal with a website with a lot of 301s? Errors?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know if you can put, do you mean like internally, like when you're crawling the site, you're seeing a bunch of them internally? I don't know if you can answer AM and throw that in, but if we're talking about a site that has a lot of them internally, again, what my typical approach would be to identify what pages they're coming from. So why are we linking to 301s in the first place? Very often it could be something that's systemic. It could be they went from having a trailing slash to not having a trailing slash, and a ton of our URLs are just internally linked the other way around or something to that effect. And so in that regard, you might ask a developer and say, hey, listen, I noticed like every internal link is missing the www, or every internal link is missing this. And if you can notice a pattern, usually you can partner with a developer or someone who built the website to kind of like do a search and replace against the server and database and hit all of them in one go or something to that effect. If you're not so lucky to have something that is sort of pattern based, you're going to basically have to build a list of places that you're going to go into the copy or the content, and you're going to change the link. There's really no way around it, but it's something that I feel like is worth doing. Yeah. So, people do this a lot. They're like, all right, well, this is why hiring an SEO agency like Stella Rising is very important for doing a website migration, because you have situations where the developers are not necessarily viewing, and it's debatable whether or not it is their job. They're not viewing their job to go into all of your old blog posts and update to your new URL patterns. So they've given you redirects, but they're not going to like go in and update 500 blogs to point to your new product strings. And so somebody has to do that work, and very often it's just manual. But find and replace tools can be a good option. If we're talking about like a WordPress website, there's a lot of plugins that let you do find and replace. Just be very careful, because you can definitely like screw up things in your database.
Okay, and let's take the last one. I've chosen this. I've seen a lot of discussions about header tags, but sometimes it's unclear how to prioritize them. Could you shed some light on how to determine the hierarchy of header tags and their impact on SEO?
Yeah, that's a good question. And unfortunately, I don't have a really great answer, because I too have seen a lot of different case studies pointing to a lot of different things. But I would just say use your best judgment. Like the things I'm talking about would be like 82% of pages have a duplicate H2, and the H2 is join our newsletter. And it's like, all right, I don't know 100% if this is going to have like a definitive ranking impact, but like it doesn't feel important from an accessibility standpoint to have this marked up as an H2. It doesn't feel important to me from like a saying what this page is about. It's certainly not like the second most important thing this page is about. It's the newsletter call to action in the bottom of the page. So it's stuff like that where it's like, there's clearly no regrets in changing that to just like a span tag and styling it like however they want to style it, and saying, okay, say the page is about chocolate donuts, and there's like another H2 on the page that's, or there's another piece of text on the page that we can mark up as like why we have the best chocolate donuts or whatever, and that's an H2. I don't know, do I have a ton of case studies to point to that's going to be way better? No, I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure we can find examples of that in our own work. But what I'm more certain of is like, if it's quick and easy enough often to take those global elements that are just part of the woodwork, newsletter, learn more in the bottom of a page or something like that, that's just like senselessly marked up in a semantic heading that theoretically should have a function from a meaning, SEO, and accessibility standpoint. And so I would sort of take that kind of like common sense tack to it and not even stress like whether or not there is huge data or case studies behind it. If you were to just like read the page in a screen reader, or you're to look at the page and just the semantic headings, like, does it make sense or does it look like a bunch of junk? Obviously our aim should be to make stuff look like it makes sense, and usually we see a benefit out of that. So I know it's kind of like a non-answer, but there are there's some case studies out there on that'll show you either way.
Anyway, thank you very much for your expertise. It was really deep and meaningful webinar. Thanks a lot, everyone, for being with us today. And in a few days, we'll announce our next webinar where you can learn about how to use data for effective SEO. And don't forget to subscribe on us. Don't forget to subscribe on Stella Rising and, of course, John. And have a good day, everyone, and see you in next 2 weeks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for having me on.